listening to the Becoming More Me podcast with me, Theresa Lear Levine. You're already enough. But if you're anything like me, you thrive when you're stretching and developing yourself, creating more of the person you feel called to be. This podcast is here to inspire and support you. Let's release the negative, reinforce the positive, and elevate our vibe together as we tap into our limitless potential to transform and grow. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining me on the Becoming More Me podcast. I am excited that I have a guest with me today. So it's not just me jabbering today. And I'm really excited to introduce you to her. Her name is Melissa Chureau, and we have known each other since last September when we connected. She had gotten in touch with me about overcoming a particular fear. I'll let her tell you a little bit more about that. And we have really kind of gotten to know each other quite well since then. And she's very inspiring in the things that she's doing. And I'm really excited to have her here. She's a mom. She also has ADHD like me. So neurodivergent. She's a lawyer. She's a life coach. She loves to meditate. She loves to run, ride her bike, be outside. She lives on the other side of the country from me, out in Washington. And I think you'll really like getting to know her and hear some of her story today. So welcome, Melissa.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And it's been so much fun getting to know you and do the work that we've been doing together too since last fall. So before we got in touch with each other in September, did you know what EFT was? Like, had you done it at all?
Yeah, I mean, I had sort of like a passing familiarity with it. I had a therapist who used something kind of similar called EMDR.
Okay.
And it had worked really well, although she was coming from maybe a different background than you. And so it worked really well, but I didn't understand that it was something that you could just use for like anything and everything. Okay. I thought, oh, it's just for like trauma, you know? Okay. And it did work really well for that. And so, but I knew a little bit about tapping. I had read, I think, like the tapping solution. I had never really, I had done it, but not like regularly, and certainly not with someone who could help me through it, which is, I think, kind of a game changer, especially if you're new at it.
Yeah, I can see how that would be. So what was the fear that you came seeking help with? If you don't mind expanding upon that.
Yeah, no, it's this long-standing fear I'd had of flying. So, and I don't really know, I kind of have a sense of when it cropped up and why, but I had this fear of flying. I'm 51 since I think I was about 19 years old. And I used to love to fly. So it was like this inexplicable fear of flying and very debilitating, like think I'm going to die every time I get on a plane, doing whatever I can to try to avoid being on the plane. And I had done a lot of work. I had done, I think I had done some hypnosis. I had done definitely some cognitive behavioral therapy around it. And all of that was helpful. And I had actually done pretty well in overcoming a lot of the fear and had actually gotten on the plane. And then the pandemic happened. And that completely changed everything.
That like brought out and exacerbated every issue that any of us had, didn't it?
Absolutely. And so that one was back. And I was like, wait, what are you doing here again? And it, and it was a little bit different. And we had this opportunity at the time, we didn't realize Omicron was around the corner, but at the time it was like post Delta and like, it was time to go see family. My husband's family is all in France, and I'm going to correct you. We're in Oregon, not Washington. Although,
oh goodness, I knew that too, because I was going to say Portland, which is obviously Oregon, and
it's Oregon. It's cool. We're really close. We're like 12 miles from Washington, but so but really far away from France is the point. And
yes,
we're a long plane ride, and no other real way to get there. So I was like, I've got to deal with this because I don't want to be miserable on what amounts to like a 14-hour flight there from here. So,
right.
Yeah. That was why I contacted you.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you did. And so when we initially were working together, it was really focused on trying to get you ready for that flight and everything else. What did you notice from the time we started that work to like when you took the trip, or even thereafter when you could really reflect on the whole experience?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty intense because, being this sort of like, I can pull myself up by my own bootstraps. I've got to deal with my own stuff and ADHD. Let's put things off to the last minute.
Yeah.
I waited. So I think our flight was mid-October, and I contacted you in probably like mid-September,
Right.
maybe even closer to the end of September. And so it was like, oh my God, got to deal with this pronto.
Yes.
Probably didn't help the situation, but upon reflection, I mean, I think we met like, I don't remember, 4 or 5 times. And then you were awesome enough to put together some EFT scripts for me to do. And thank God for those. Oh my
Oh yeah,
God.
I did those recordings for you that you could listen to.
Yes. And because the day before our flight to France, everything fell apart. Our flight had been canceled. They hadn't told us. I only learned when I was trying to check in. We had these extensive plans because it was a big family reunion. And so it was like super stressful. And I always take it as like a sign, like, oh, that must mean I'm not supposed to get on the plane. So like I was feeding into that narrative. And
Yeah.
thank God I had those recordings, because I was able to tap through that and calm it to the point where, I could get a little bit of sleep and actually get up and get on the plane.
Yeah.
And by the time I was on the plane, it was cool. I was fine. It was, and so it worked, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And
Did
then
it feel weird for it to feel okay?
it did. It felt like something was missing. Kind of, it's kind of like, when you've been sick for a little bit and you get better and you're like excited to be better, but something feels weird because,
Right.
you're sick and you're like,
I always
wait,
think it feels like this like quiet openness, this
yeah,
spaciousness where there used to be like clutter or just
yes,
so much stuff. And it's almost like you don't quite know how to, yeah, I have a tendency to want to fill the space.
yes.
So learning to sit with that openness is sometimes the hard part for me, even though it's exactly what I was going for.
Totally true. And I think like those neuro pathways, listen to me sounding like a scientist, but those neuro
Oh, it's all good.
pathways are like, like they're so formed, and we've just recently changed them, and we've recently like fixed our nervous system. And so like there's this inclination to go into that other area, and you're like, wait, I don't have to do that. And I can just be here. But I did find myself sort of scanning the horizon, and I was like, you know what? No, I don't have to scan the horizon. I don't have to be hyper vigilant and look for something to scare me. Like I can be okay with just being okay, and that's cool.
Even though it feels weird.
It feels weird, but yeah, cool. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I know at the same time that we began working together, you were also going through your life coach certification, which was really cool because I mean, I love working with people that are already pretty well versed in therapy and coaching and all that kind of stuff. So you already like really had your stuff together mentally and everything else around all the issues that you had. So it was fun to get to work with your mind further in that. What had inspired you to begin the whole life coaching path?
Oh gosh, I mean that's kind of it's a little bit of a long story. I'll try to shorten it up, but
I like
um,
stories.
I like stories. Way back when I was born. No, it's not that long of a story, but it feels like it. Way back when I had finished college, and I kind of was trying to, like most people, try to figure out what they were doing in their life, and even during college, I have really bad what I now know to be as imposterism, or this, the experience of imposterism, for all kinds of reasons, many of them having to do with ADHD, just growing up really different in life. We grew up kind of in a more modest socioeconomic range and neighborhood, and were next to like really wealthy people. And so, this disparity, and then the way I was wired differently, I really did feel different. And, I've certainly done also a lot of work on that. But the point is that I made some choices in college, and then after college, that weren't necessarily consistent with what I really wanted to do. So when I look back and I look at college, And I was really interested in like social sciences, psychology, like how do people think, how they operate, how can I help? And then I had this sort of like, oh, I'm not smart enough for that. Oh, you have to do math and science. Ooh.
Mm,
Which is super weird because I used to be really good at those things. So it's just the stories that we tell ourselves, right?
yep.
They are not, and usually aren't true. So those are the stories I was telling myself. So I ended up doing English, which I loved, and I love to read. And, being an ADHD person, I love doing lots of different things. So
Yeah.
I found something I liked, but it didn't necessarily like feed my soul, or it wasn't like, I can't wait to, yes, I loved writing poetry and that sort of thing, but it was not like feed me. And so post college, I was trying to figure out what to do. And I took all these tests. And long and the short of it is, I was terrified to take the GRE, which is the test that you have to take frequently to get into like a master's program. And it requires you to know some things. And so I just had all that imposterism. So instead of going into education, I was also interested in film school or like psychology or social work or something like that. It's like, I kind of did some research. And I was like, and this is going to sound nuts. I decided to take the law school entrance exam, which is known as the LSAT, instead. And I tell people that, and they're like, that doesn't make sense. Like you didn't think you were smart enough to do the GRE, but you were smart enough to do the LSAT. I was like, I don't know. This is the way my brain works. So I did that, and so I ended up becoming a lawyer. And so this is the long story, trying to make it short. I have found ways to, and have found things that I enjoy about being a lawyer.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feed my soul in the way
Yeah.
that some of these other things do. So it was like, okay, maybe after 20 years of doing this thing, I can try to explore that other thing that really does feed my soul.
Yeah.
And so I ended up finding life coaching because I was looking into getting a master's in psychology. And I was like, no, like, and I have plenty of experience with therapists and love them, and they're super valuable. But I really wanted to do something that was going to, I don't know, be like really get people to achieve their goals and do something positive in their life where they were feeling like they were really moving forward.
Yeah.
And while I think psychologists and therapists can certainly do that, there's a
Right.
lot of focus on digging up the past. And I'm not saying we don't do that, but like kind of staying there in the problem
Yeah.
and not really, and maybe analyzing it and all that. And that is useful. But I really wanted to be in the solution and help people move forward. And so
Yeah.
that's what inspired me to go to a life coaching program.
Absolutely. Education's changed so much and the way that
Yeah.
people revere it or, respect it and everything too. Like you don't have to have like the master's degree or whatever in order to be excellent at helping people with something. And I think that's changing so much. It's crazy to me. Like as I have, my sons growing up and stuff, when I think about like, college for them and I'm like, it might not look the same for them as it did for me, with education being so different and so ever changing and like being able to you can go on your computer and sign up for a class to learn anything. It's nuts. It's not
Which
the way it
is
was
like,
for us when we were
it's
younger.
so cool that you can do that. And yes, it's everything is so radically different. And had I known or had this even existed, I'm not sure it did at the time, I might have done something completely different.
Absolutely. But I think it's really cool, like knowing you in the ways that I do, like the way that you've kind of taken things and woven your path to where you are right now, because you've brought a lot of mindfulness into the law that you've practiced and a lot of teachings about the imposterism and everything else. So it's all kind of just evolving for you in what seems like a very organic way. And I think that's really cool. I'd love to hear more about like how you feel about mindfulness in law or how imposterism plays into all of that.
Yeah, and I mean, this is really interesting. So, like, for the last, I don't know, I mean, I've been a meditator for well over 20 years.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate to, I mean, I had no idea this is what, I mean, It's kind of like where I went to undergraduate, and I was in the English department. I ended up taking a bunch of classes from what I later learned were like superstars in their field. I just had no idea. And the same is true when I started to learn to meditate in Marin County, California. I went to a place called Spirit Rock Meditation Center, which, anyone who is familiar with Western meditation has probably heard of it, or certainly heard of some of the teachers there. And I was so fortunate because they're really amazing. And it was an amazing experience to.
A great way to be introduced to it.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it was just like, free Monday night sits with Jack Cornfield.
No,
what? I had no idea. I had no idea what an experience I was getting. I mean, of course, I knew it once I had the experience, but I didn't realize these people were like, I mean, they would never consider themselves rock stars, but I consider them the rock stars of meditation. So I started a long time ago, but I would say that I did a really good job, as I think we humans do, at sort of compartmentalizing my life, especially after I became a lawyer. It was like I somehow told myself the story, again, another story I told myself, because it's just not the truth. But the story I told myself was to be a lawyer, you needed to be a certain way. And particularly I was, my first job out of law school was as a prosecutor in a busy district attorney's office. And so I just had this idea of like who I had to be for that. And while I did incorporate mindfulness practices into what I was doing, nobody knew it. Like nobody knew that I was, doing a little meditation before I walked into trial.
Yeah, but we totally joked about it. I remember in one session we were talking about like lawyers who meditate, and you were like, "Yeah, there's like two of them." Like, it's just not like what you associate the profession and the persona with that person doing like in their personal time. But it should be lawyers need to meditate. That's like a big message here today. Meditate, lawyers.
Yes. I mean, everyone needs to meditate, but lawyers really need to meditate. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is I just didn't integrate it. And in a lot of ways, didn't integrate it into other areas of my life either. And so, I'd say in the last 10 years, I've been working really hard at integrating all the different parts of myself, including mindfulness. So it's been something that I am more, out or open about. I no longer see it as somebody like, and this is what happens, right? We tell ourselves, that we're like weak or something. I have no idea like why anyone would think somebody who meditates is weak. I certainly don't, but like that's a story I was telling myself. And so, and I think a lot of lawyers do, like, nobody could see me be like an actual real human being,
No, instead of seeing the strength, the vulnerability, which is also strength and mistaken a lot of the time, and seeing the boundaries and all of the other things that doing that practice encompasses, seeing it in a totally different way.
Yeah. So yes, exactly. So I've been, really on a mission to integrate it into my own life, but then also kind of into the profession. So the last several years, I have worked with some law enforcement partners as well as other attorneys and or just myself, and put on, we call them continuing legal education. They're required, so the attorneys have to do it. And in Oregon, it's really cool. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, the Oregon State Bar made a requirement that you had to have a mental health CLE credit every 3 years or so. And so we took advantage of that. Like, this is awesome. And so we have taught mindfulness. I've taught mindfulness at my current employer, the Oregon Department of Justice. Talk about integration. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm teaching mindfulness. I now do a monthly mindfulness practice. And I think the last time there were close to 30 people, and we've just gotten started. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, super cool. And then also the imposterism. I have given talks and workshops with other attorneys on that experience, and we get vulnerable, and we talk about like how we feel about things and what our experience is.
Are other lawyers willing to like chime in, or are they just kind of sitting there quietly, silently nodding their heads? Like, is it one of those things that they're afraid to admit they feel or experience?
Yeah, I think, well, okay. So I belong to this really great organization called the Oregon Women Lawyers, and it's a nonprofit organization and helps promote women in the law. And it's not just women who are members, but it's predominantly women. And so it's a little bit of a different feel because it's mostly women who have shown up to these workshops. So, you know, generally speaking, we're willing to go there
Yeah.
a little bit more sometimes than men, not always. Um,
Tell
but
me though, I remember you saying something about imposterism having once been thought to just be a woman's problem. Was that like based on a
yes,
study or something? What was that? Remind
yeah.
me. That
So,
was fascinating.
so well, there is a study. I don't know exactly when it was, but 70% of all people experience imposterism, and I think that's largely underreported because I think people are afraid to admit that this is something they have experienced. But when they originally started looking at imposterism, and they used to call it imposter syndrome, and I have moved away from calling that, and I wish I want to come up with an even, well, I have a better term. I'm now calling it unwarranted self doubt. It's not a fully recognized term, so but if I keep using it, maybe people will use it because
Yeah,
the
I love
problem I
it.
have
I
with
was just going to say, because some people don't recognize it because it is just a form, it's a form of self doubt.
but in notice, it's unwarranted. That's the key piece, right? It's not like everyone experiences self doubt, but it is unwarranted given the person's experience and capacity. But they experience it as if they don't have the competency, and at any given moment, somebody's going to be found out and they're going to be exposed. And that's why the term imposter syndrome or imposterism has come up. I've stopped using imposter syndrome because to me that kind of pathologizes it. And I'm not saying there might not be, it's not in the
Um,
DSM-5 or whatever. It
it's a
might be.
great point, and I tend to use imposter syndrome more, and I think I will move away from that based on
Well,
what you're
and
saying. The
I
same way that I don't like PTSD. I hate that disorder at the
yes,
end of that.
the disorder, and I don't even like imposterism. That's why I'm trying to say like unwarranted self doubt. But until that term catches, and there might be certainly situations where there might be people suffering to such an extent that you could pathologize it because they are experiencing it to such extent. But I think largely, and so what happened was that when it was first studied, and it was really some good study material, they were just studying women. So of course it was like, well, women experience this, but it inadvertently, I think, I know that the study, folks who conducted the study did not intend for this, but it kind of fed into this sort of hysterical woman trope, right?
Yeah.
Like the overly sensitive, doesn't know if she can do it, all this kind of thing, which is just a bunch of bullshit. And
Yep.
so, that's why, so Rashika Tolashan, I hope I'm saying her name correctly, she's amazing,
Yeah.
and Julianne Burry, they worked together on a couple of articles in the Harvard Business Review. And the one that shook my world and from which this new mission came into play was stop telling women that they have imposter syndrome. And they
Yeah.
talked about this. And I think it's really, really important. And it's something that is more experienced by people in any sort of underrepresented areas. So, BIPOC, LGBTQ plus folks, because historically they have been the outsider. And so when they walk into an area, whether that's law or something else, they either feel like they have to overperform or they don't want to be seen, right? And so there is this unwarranted self doubt that is tends to be more experienced by underrepresented person, but it's also experienced by everybody.
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, so
Definitely
that
worth exploring if anybody has any of that unwarranted self-doubt. It's worth exploring and exposing and getting to the bottom of because so much changes when you realize those lies you're allowing yourself to believe. And
well,
they're
you and
just
I
showing your fears.
yes, you and I worked through it. Just for the listeners, like I had imposterism around another podcast that I was going to participate in. And it was the craziest imposterism. It was like imposterism. So the podcast that I was on is How I Made It Through. Kristen Taylor, really great. But she has all these amazing people who have gone through, suffered through something really big and horrendous, and they've come through it, and they have these remarkable stories. And so I had imposterism that my story just wasn't bad enough, and so
comparisons are hard.
Yes. Yes. And so we definitely worked on that and tapped on that, and then like had a great time working through that. So I definitely think EFT for anyone who's experiencing imposterism is a really amazing tool, as is mindfulness and meditation, and really like slowing down and examining our thoughts and being with them.
Right.
And like
some things we can get to the bottom of and they're done, and other things are just going to kind of come back over and over in different ways throughout our life. And I think that unwarranted self-doubt is one of those things that is always going to kind of rear its head in one way or another, especially when you go to try something new. I mean, anytime you're a guest on a podcast for the first time, like I remember how nervous I was when it was my first time guesting on a podcast. I was definitely using tapping to get myself psyched up for it and to overcome the feelings of like, who am I to be an expert talking on this person's podcast when I've never done this before?
Yeah, no, I tapped before this one, and truth be told, it did help, but I'm sweaty, so it's just natural. It's just that natural feeling, and one of the things that I think has complemented that the EFT practice for me, whether it's imposterism or ADHD or really anything, is and as part of mindfulness,
we've worked on all sorts of things.
I work on all sorts of things. Is self-compassion.
Yeah.
And I know I'm not alone, but I have like a 5th degree black belt in being crappy to myself. I really know how to do it. And I have, this really muscular inner critic. And what's so interesting? I have different inner critics, which I didn't realize.
Oh.
And one I just
introduce me.
Yes, no, it's really so I have like the one that's more the one that like I'm really familiar with. Super verbal, very mean, very awful. You don't know what you're doing. Who the hell are you? I can't believe
nasty bitch, huh?
Yeah, just just horrible. You should just like leave, go crawl under a rock. What good are you?
Do you ever name them? Like now that you know their personalities, you don't have to share their names.
Oh no,
like,
totally.
Do you ever name them?
There was back in the 70s, 80s, the Schoolhouse Rock.
Yeah.
So there was like I don't know if it was like a commercial or part of the Schoolhouse Rock, but it was like during that era, and it was this character called Yuck Mouth, and he would sing this song.
I remember.
Yuck Mouth because he didn't brush his teeth. And so that's what I call that nasty little bitch. Yuck Mouth.
Shut up, Yuck Mouth.
That is Yuck Mouth. But I recently discovered another one, which you and I haven't talked about, but I think is really fascinating, which is, and this is where the mindfulness comes in, is that, and tapping for that matter, it's just that tapping tends to be verbal.
Consciousness.
So it's just this different way. But I was noticing, I think it was, I don't know, I really screwed up a parenting moment like a couple of days ago, or I don't know, whatever.
Happens to the best of us.
And I went to this super, 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 super dark place. And there was no verbal inner critic. And what I think it was the inner critic that developed when I was pre-verbal. I think that's what that was. That's the theory.
Very interesting.
And so that was really interesting. But that one responded really well to this sort of very soothing self-compassion. So I was laying in bed, and so I don't know, I didn't, I guess, feel like tapping. It's like, I want to just, and I just do, I like put my hands on my heart, and I talk to myself like a friend would.
Yeah.
And like, this is really hard. You're not alone. Everyone makes mistakes, and it's okay.
That is that light side of the heart chakra that we've talked about
Yes.
before, that like parental cheerleader, encouraging voice from within, that is the
Totally.
side that you want your heart chakra to be expressing through. And the
Yeah.
other stuff is that like dark side that's like totally the critic that's keeping you out of everything. So that was
Yeah.
just, you totally just flipped it around.
Yeah. But, with that more muscular, very verbal inner critic, I need, I think Kristen Neff, who does all of that self-compassion research and work,
Yeah.
and she just wrote a book in the last year called Fierce Self-Compassion, and it's
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. I haven't finished it. Um, I, like you, like listening to my books. I still think that's legit reading, but
Totally legit.
I listen. And, and that, I think, she talks about fierce self-compassion, the mom who lifts the car off of the kid,
Yeah.
that's fierce compassion, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
it comes from that. And so when that yuck mouth shows up, or some version of that yuck mouth shows up, I need to exercise that self-compassion more.
You gotta dig deep to go up against yuck mouth, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I got to yell at her and be
Yeah.
like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Thank you for trying to help me, but you need to go sit in the corner and shut up.
No, step aside.
Yep.
I got this.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's really cool that you've noticed that. And just the different ways that, the internal you kind of shows up and does, and the things that they do when they do show up. And
Yeah.
that you have the possibility to quiet them and to change the outcomes, which is just so empowering. So incredibly empowering.
Yeah.
I was having actually a lot of fun reading through. You had sent over like some background bio information, and it's like we've gotten to know each other in all of these different ways, but like the surfacey stuff, it's like unknown to me. Like it's so kind of funny. And like I loved hearing in there that you loved Dana Carvey growing up, because that was my favorite comedian growing up. And I just like I think about like the philosophical stuff and the just like the humorous moments and things that we've had and all the conversations. And like I was thinking about Dana Carvey today, and I loved that one skit that he did. He was talking about religion or whatever, and then in kids, and he talked about how his son would say like he'd be like driving him crazy, and then he would pause and be like, "Daddy, does God have feet?" Like, like say something like that. And I was just like, it just took me back to that, and like that was kind of like those were beginnings for me too in a lot of ways.
I
But
love Dana Carvey, and it's something that my husband and I bonded over. My husband and I have been married for 27 years, and so
congratulations.
we've grown up together, really. And, back, and actually just recently we rewatched one of the Dana Carvey specials where it's like the chopping broccoli song
Oh, chopping
and like
broccoli.
framing OJ and all the stuff.
Yes.
And we're like, we still love it. And we like turned our daughter onto it. She's 13. And
Did she find it funny?
oh, she did. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because like I sometimes wonder about that stuff. Like we always try to revisit the movies and stuff with the kids.
Yeah.
Sometimes like it's the first scene and it's like, this isn't even funny to me anymore.
I know.
Sometimes it's like, how do you not find this funny? This is classic stuff.
She
But
did think he was a little crazy. We watched a couple of specials and she was like, is this guy on drugs or something? I was like, maybe.
possible. I mean,
So I didn't tell you, this is my like, I don't know, my claim to fame in air quotes. When I lived in Marin County, there are a lot of famous people there. Dana Carvey is one of them.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
I guess, yeah, it makes sense.
So, and I don't know. I mean, you just know there are like famous people around. It's in San Francisco, and it's like Lucasfilms is right there. And so there are people. I mean, it's not like LA, but it's, there are people. And so I was working at this restaurant called the Avenue Grill in downtown Mill Valley. And I was like, I don't know, 25 or 6 or something. And I felt like I was a teenager, but I was, in my mid 20s. And I go up to the counter to go wait on these people, and it's freaking Dana Carvey. And I was like, oh, how do I wait on this guy? Do I have to be funny? He was like the nicest guy ever. And and a good tipper. So I just remember just like tripping all over myself because Dana Carvey was sitting in my section.
And even better when you get to meet them in person and they turn out to be just as good as you imagined them to be. And then
Yeah.
so sometimes it can be a letdown.
For sure. Not with him. He was great.
That is awesome. But yeah, I was having fun reading through and just like seeing different things that like we've never actually talked about. And I came across that and I was like, oh yeah, me too. Because I know we had like some musical tastes and things that came up that were similar from like back in the day and stuff
Right.
that we talked about, different bands and things that I don't think most people even know who they are anymore and stuff like that. So that's been a lot of fun. So what is the kind of like coaching or the type of client that you most enjoy helping right now as you're like coming into all the coaching and enjoying that so much?
Well, I think so much about coaching. I mean, certainly you can coach when you haven't had the experience yourself, but I think that deep, rich coaching happens when it's something that you've experienced yourself. So for me, the people that I really enjoy helping who are people who are looking to align who they really are in everything they do, particularly work. So
Yeah.
it's that integration piece, that finding their worth and their purpose in their work. And that doesn't mean that they necessarily have to get a different job, although they
No.
can.
Purpose is so important though. Like
Yeah,
it
yeah.
amazes me how many people are actually walking around not feeling purposeful. Like to me, that's sometimes confusing, even though I mean, I work with people that feel like they're trying to change their purpose or they're not quite sure about it or whatever. But it's like, I just purpose is like what gets me up in the morning. Like I can't understand how people can't like want to dig into that.
Well, yeah, and but a lot of people have like what I call like whack-a-mole lives, or jobs, where their job is like literally showing up. And even if they're like, you know, high level CEOs or lawyers or teachers or entrepreneurs or whatever they are, they have usually not entrepreneurs, but people who are very high level and they're just like doing the same thing every day. And it's
Yeah.
kind of this panicked, I'm whacking a mole, and it's very hard to find purpose
Yeah.
when that's your experience.
I've
So,
always loved that analogy when I talk about emotions. I used to use the whack-a-mole analogy a lot because it's like, people try to suppress or push down an emotion only to have it pop back up somewhere else.
it doesn't go away. I mean, that's the thing we know, right? Like it definitely doesn't go away. And so no matter how hard we try
Yep.
and how fast we get at whacking that mole, it keeps cropping up. So
Yep. I'd rather cut it off at the roots and not have to whack anymore and be able to slow down. But that's too funny.
yeah.
So
No, I mean, those are the people I really like to work with on the individual level. And I really like to, with this imposterism work, working with organizations or firms on how they can better support their people, how they can foster some belonging, because it's not just up to the individual. Much like climate change isn't just going to be, cured it by, all of us recycling and reducing and reusing,
yeah.
right?
So what do you see as like the big positive ripple effect potential of people getting that unwarranted self-doubt out of their way?
Gosh, I mean, I think they tap, this, unsuspected inner resource, which is themselves, and they
Mm-hmm.
fully identify with what their worth is. And then they connect. You talked about that vulnerability piece. That's
Yeah.
how we connect. We become our true selves, we connect with others, and we're kind of unstoppable and we can do all of this good. And in a way that, if we're walking around with all this unwarranted self-doubt and all of this, um, you know, just feeling like we're out of alignment with ourselves, that's a very dark place to be. Even if we get
Yeah.
used to it and we don't recognize it that way, it just is. And we put blinders on and we don't really see other people anymore. And our worlds get really small. And so, when we uncover that like diamond inside of ourselves that's been
Yeah.
there all along, we get to like shine and connect and like really, really open things up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's a lot of purpose, potential, and empowerment that can come out of the work that you're doing, and I'm hoping that you're feeling that as you're doing it, and it's
Yeah.
getting you really excited because you're doing some really cool things in the world. If people want to learn more about what you're doing, where can they find you?
Right now, I am at my website. It's probably the best place to find me, called thefullymindful.com. So, the fully mindful, because that's what we'll be together.
Awesome. I love it. I am so appreciative that you showed up to be here with me today and have this conversation. It was a lot of fun. And I will have all of Melissa's information in the show notes for this episode if you want to find her. And thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was great. Really fun.
Take care.
You too.
All righty. That is a wrap. Thanks so much for listening. If you loved this episode, please share it with a friend or post on social media and tag me so I can personally connect and thank you. Until next time, keep taking bold and brave action steps towards becoming more of who you want to be in this world. You are capable, you are worthy, and you are enough. Keep shining your light.